I'm the only candidate that wants to get out of Afghanistan tomorrow.
In guarding the civil liberties and civil rights lies the essence of liberty.
We must not accept these reasons to destroy each other.
The real question is, how do you prevent a terrorist attack?
The hatred continues and the violence continues against the state.
Here is a nation of laws, and these laws are here to protect everybody. Equal justice.
No detention without a trial.
So you have the question of morality and legality.
And the efforts that you have here now are a tremendous asset.
The more we educate our fellow Americans, the better our society will be.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Mark Hinkle, and I'm the new chair of the California Civil Rights Alliance. I will be the moderator for the discussion this afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the American Muslim Alliance Foundation, for putting on this seminar this afternoon, and Dr. Saeed, who heads up the American Muslim Alliance. Very much appreciate his support for putting on this forum. So the topic today is NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. But before we get into that, I'd like to give you 3 examples of why it's very important for groups like the American Muslim Alliance, California Civil Rights Alliance, and others to work in conjunction with one another in coalitions. And the most recent example involves the organization I'm involved with, the California Civil Rights Alliance. After the passage of the Patriot Act, post 9/11, there were 400 different governmental bodies that passed resolutions condemning the unconstitutional parts of the Patriot Act. The California Civil Rights Alliance is one of those organizations that mounted a campaign, and we got introduced in the California legislature Senate Joint Resolution 10, which called on Congress to repeal the unconstitutional parts of the Patriot Act.
Good.
And that coalition came together with Republicans, Democrats, Greens, Libertarians, Mexican American Political Association, the Archdiocese of San Francisco, and of course the American Muslim Alliance, and various other groups. And working together as a coalition, we were able to get that passed through both houses of the state legislature. And again, I think that shows that working together in coalitions, we can not only have an impact that will outlast our activism today, but we can have an impact today. And I hope at the conclusion of our panel discussion today, people will join with us and work in a coalition to see if we can repeal the National Defense Authorization Act, specifically Section 1021, which allows the President of the United States to detain U.S. citizens without due process, without going through the courts indefinitely. So now on to our panelists, and again, we are talking about the National Defense Authorization Act. Governor Gary Johnson was a 2-term governor for the state of New Mexico. New Mexico, as you probably know, is a heavily Democratic state, but he was actually elected as a Republican. And when he decided to engage in political activity, he was politely told, thank you for your participation, but you have no chance of winning. And of course, he wound up winning. I happen to have a little contact with Gary Johnson over the years. When he announced that he was dropping out of the Republican race and seeking the Libertarian Party nomination, I actually traveled to Albuquerque to sign him in as a member of the Libertarian Party and to have him re-register as a member of the Libertarian Party. And so, anyhow, we welcome him here and to speak on the behalf of the repeal of the NDAA.
I'm the Libertarian nominee for president. I looked at this invitation to be here today from the American Muslim Alliance and jumped at the opportunity to be here and to be able to state some of the positions that I have running for President of the United States. I think it's significant that there are only going to be 3 candidates on the ballot in all 50 states. That would be Barack Obama, Mitt Romney, and myself. At this point, we're on the ballot in 43 states, and we have issues with a few of those states, but very significant that we, like I say, do plan on being on the ballot in all 50 states. So there are big differences between myself and the other 2 candidates. One is I'm the only candidate that does not want to bomb Iran. I'm the only candidate that wants to get out of Afghanistan tomorrow, bring the troops home. I'm the only candidate that believes in marriage equality. I'm the only candidate that wants to end the drug wars. I'm the only candidate that wants to balance the federal budget tomorrow, believing that it's very important. I'm the only candidate that is advocating abolishing the income tax, corporate tax, and the IRS, and replacing it with one federal consumption tax, which I think would really reboot the American economy. I think Americans really care about 3 things. Ending the war. I was opposed to Iraq from the very get-go. I thought that if we went into Iraq, we would find ourselves in a civil war to which there would be no end. I thought we had I believe we have military surveillance capability to see any sort of threat against the United States develop. We would have options if those threats were to develop, but they didn't develop. And why go into Iraq? I thought we were going to find ourselves in a civil war to which there would be no end. I am opposed to the Patriot Act. I would repeal the Patriot Act if given the opportunity. And I would not have signed the National Defense Authorization Act, allowing for detainment, arrest and detainment of U.S. citizens without being charged. I think that this is why we have fought wars in this country. And as a candidate for President of the United States, I've been out on the stump, and I think there is a misunderstanding of Muslims in the United States, and that this is the United States of America. We are very inclusive, and I wanted to be here to show my support for the Muslim community. I wanted to be here to voice my objection to the Patriot Act and to the National Defense Authorization Act. Both of those categories supported by Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. Reverend Jackson, good to see you, young man. We have a packed house just for you.
How are you today? There is so much going on. Yet, with all of that which I am trying to do in our organization, the Rainbow Push Coalition, we have to start by expressing our appreciation for what the American Muslim Alliance is trying to do. Part of our mission is to make a one Big Ten America, for all included and none are left behind.
All right.
Often opening up these doors is not an easy challenge, but we see that when we are persistent, the things happen. I grew up in this Greenville, South Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, Greensboro area. What a difference a few years have made. This is a new South. You could not have had the Carolina Panthers behind the cotton curtain, the Charlotte Bobcats behind the cotton curtain. You couldn't have had Boeing and Airbus, Honda and Hyundai behind the cotton curtain, but we pulled down these walls. In some sense, that remains our challenge to Muslim alliances, keep pulling down walls. Now, 84 campaign, we involved Muslims in a very real way in our campaign. And Jim Zogby became part of our organizing. And I shall never forget, at that time, there was such sensitivity until Muslims who particularly Arabs who gave money to campaigns, they gave the money back. As if somehow your money was dirty, it didn't count. We keep on bringing down barriers. We're arguing for a two-state solution. A mutual recognition, mutual respect alliance between two nations. We still hold fast to that position. There'll be no peace for one group until there's justice for both. We want peace, we want justice, we want to continue to work together. I want to say this in closing. There's room for you in the Rainbow Coalition. We work together and work on a broad range of issues. You can't just be in one issue group and build coalitions. We fight to stop voter purging and voter suppression. Let's walk hand in hand. As we fight to end unnecessary wars, let's walk hand in hand. I cannot forget, I was in Milwaukee 3 weeks ago when the Sikhs were killed. The killer said he thought they were Muslims. That's how fresh is this idea. Some years ago, a young Vincent Chan was beaten to death by some auto workers in Detroit. They said they didn't mean to kill him, they thought he was Japanese, as if it mattered. We must not accept these reasons to destroy each other. We need each other, and we in the Rainbow, we stand with the American Muslim Alliance because you matter to us. What you represent in the Middle East, and as well as home, is good for the healing of our nation and good for our world.
With your long experience, sir, in the struggle that is going on, would you like to give us some specific advice that we should follow in order to move forward?
Well, one thing I am convinced of, in democracy, progress comes through coalition. I've noticed in the last month, the Sikhs, after the massacre in Milwaukee, are now walking with us publicly and demonstrating with us. When we walk together, we develop mutual needs for each other. You cannot fight this fight just because you're right. You fight because you build alliances and relationships. My advice is, let's work together on a range of issues, including the issue which is primary to you. We all have an interest in voter suppression, not a taking place. We all have an interest in Medicare and Medicaid. We all have an interest in reindustrialization. We all have an interest in ending these unnecessary wars now taking place and the drone attacks in Pakistan. We all have an interest in that, so let's work together on it. Please remain in touch with the Rainbow Push Coalition. We are going to win this battle of humanity and human rights. Thank you very much.
Dr. Johan Galtung is a major European intellectual. He is the principal founder of the discipline of peace and conflict studies, and has many contributions to many branches of academia, including sociology, political science, economics, and history. He has published more than 1,000 articles and over 100 books, and has founded a number of organizations centered on the promotion of peace. His Institute, TRANSCEND International, has membership that encompasses over 350 invited scholars, practitioners from more than 60 countries with 22 conveners in 14 world regions. And we would like to bring him up as our next panelist to discuss our opposition to the National Defense Authorization Act. Dr. Galtung, you have the floor.
The NDAA is very well known in the world and belongs to the number of things that makes United States of America sink down in the world. Why? The strong cards of the West and of the US have been very strong. One is called democracy. The Supreme Court reaction to Citizens United took care of that one. When we were told that money is under freedom of expression, everybody knows what that means. Goodbye democracy, enters plutocracy. How about the bullet as freedom of expression? Nice little bullet, doesn't cost that much. How about that one? we are looking forward to the next decision. You see, since I'm the only non-American here, representing a relatively big thing called the world, don't imagine that this passes unnoticed. So let's go on to the next one, the rule of law. The rule of law is based on three absolute assumptions. No punishment without a sentence. No sentence without a law. No detention without a trial within 24 hours. That's called habeas corpus. Ladies and gentlemen, it took centuries to get these principles as basic pillars of the whole Western construction. It took one afternoon and New Year's Eve to demolish them. NDAA was a part of the festivities that evening, and for that reason was able to some extent to escape some attention. Not in the world. We are following it. What's the conclusion of this? That the United States of America has absolutely no authority talking about democracy and talking about rule of law. It lost the authority about human rights long time ago. Why? Because it hasn't ratified them. There are two covenants of human rights: civil and political, social and economic. What happened the 10th of December 1948 is not international law, it is a declaration. The important thing happened 16 December 1966. And the US has not ratified socio-economic human rights. Now it so happens that they belong together in a package. The world knows this. And the Foreign Secretary talks about human rights, rule of law and democracy. It has a hollow touch. Let's go one step further. Extrajudicial execution. Sitting in Washington with computers, coordinates, having some information kept secret, we cannot reveal our sources, and just simply by executive fire decide that this person should be executed. Of course, I'm also thinking of Osama bin Laden. The Bush administration in 2001, after 9/11, wanted him extradited to the US to experience US justice. The Taliban said, hand over your proofs that he is responsible and we'll comply immediately. I still haven't seen a shadow of proof. The latest idea was at that particular period, during 9/11, he was at the hospital, relatively ill in Pakistan. Now, of course, he could have organized it from a hospital. There are a couple of problems, and I think we all know them. I think we also know what a lousy job the Commission did. And yet, extrajudicial execution. No easy day. The author of the book has called this book an uninteresting book because it has passed censorship, and yet has a couple of small details. If one can, by drones and seals, execute extrajudicially internationally, then it is because one believes one is above the law. Now, there is usually only one instance above the law. It's called God. Do the United States think they're divine? It's a little bit dangerous to think that. It works if you have a sufficient number of people believing the same in exceptionalism. It's no longer the case. The US wants to go down quickly. NDAA is one of the methods. So thank you, American Muslim Alliance, for organizing this session. I'll come back very soon with a much more positive approach to the issue, the global peace movement agenda. Thank you so much.
Our next panelist is Sabahat Rafiq Sherwani. Ms. Sherwani is an elected delegate to the Democratic National Convention from the 13th Congressional District. She works as a consultant to the finance industry, is an author who also delivers talks on finance, South Asian affairs, and history, as well as philosophical discourse at various universities and forums. And I was also privy to having a delightful dinner at her home, and I want to thank her again for that delightful meal.
Now, among such august assembly, my own intellectual inadequacy is at its best, and yet I must endeavor to articulate some of the issues pursuant to the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, that affect or could potentially affect only some of us, but existence of which jeopardizes not only the foundation of our great nation, but also the fundamental tenets of human rights, vanguarding which made and defined America. In addition to sacrificing civil liberties, sections therein subvert the Constitution. Legislating constitutional contraventions and subversions challenges the foundation of our very society and our way of life in this country. The controversial sections 1021 and 1022 empower the armed forces to engage in civilian law enforcement and to selectively suspend due process and habeas corpus, as well as other rights guaranteed in the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment. Cardinal virtues enshrined in the Bill of Rights are subverted. Brian Trotman of the Recorder wrote immediately after the passage of this bill, "This pernicious," and I'm quoting that, "this pernicious law poses one of the greatest threats to civil liberties in our nation's history." Under Section 1021, foreign nationals who are alleged to have committed or merely suspected of sympathizing with or providing any level of support to groups that US designates as terrorist organizations or an affiliate or associated force may be imprisoned without charge or trial until the end of hostilities. The law affirms the executive branch's authority granted under the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, AUMF as it's commonly known, and broadens the definition and scope of covered persons, end quote. Now herein is an interesting quandary for me. A, it gives retroactive coverage to excesses under the AUMF, and more importantly, B, the war on terror is not contained in any geographic boundary or state. It isn't organized as a regular army. It doesn't have a command and control structure, hence the war has no parameters, no timetable, nor can specific quantifiable goals be stipulated to declare a mission accomplished. Theoretically, as long as a single dissenter, strong or weak, credible, not credible, otherwise, as long as a single dissenter exists, this war on a tactic, and I repeat, war on a tactic, and not on a specific state, can continue, unfortunately indefinitely. As a result, this law could be used to indefinitely detain anyone deemed to be a threat to national security as determined by the government, and in academic theory could even be used against people exercising their First Amendment rights, whether they're Muslims or not Muslims. It is often suggested that the law is not pertinent to US citizens and residents. While it doesn't specifically target the US citizens, it does not explicitly exclude or protect them either. The Section 1022B, 1 and 2 brings the citizens very much in the foray of applicability. It leaves room for open-ended executive judgment as pertaining to handling of US citizens and residents. It states that requirement to detain a military custody under this section does not extend to citizens and lawful resident aliens of the United States, except, and that's the tricky part, except to the extent permitted by the Constitution of the United States. So all the section is saying is that the administration is not required to keep a US citizen or resident in indefinite military custody, but it does not prevent the administration from doing so. Now read that in conjunction with 1021D, where AUMF is clarified, and which authorizes rounding up citizen suspects and being held without trial indefinitely. And that completes the picture for you. But even if we were to regard it as a legal ambiguity, which I'm convinced it is not, when it comes to such critical matters as liberty, such vagueness in law is perplexing and unacceptable. Congressman Garamendi very succinctly summed it up in his testimony before the Rules Committee on Due Process Right Bill. And I quote, "Civil liberties are essential to everyone. As authors to this great nation's laws, Congress must tread carefully when our fundamental constitutional rights are at stake. When writing laws that affect individual liberties, we must speak clearly and in an unwavering voice. There is no room for ambiguity or uncertainty." End quote. While the debate on applicability to the US citizens is important, there is another dimension to the unconstitutionality of the law. The 14th Amendment clearly stipulates, "Nor shall state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." The Constitution of our great nation enshrines the cardinal virtues of civilized societies and accords equal protection and right of due process to everyone, not limiting it to the citizenry of the state. So no matter how you interpret it, there is an inherent element of unconstitutionality to this law. In guarding the civil liberties and civil rights lies the essence of liberty. And yet, regretfully, it is this very tenet that stands vulnerable in the name of patriotism and security. Such digressions are not unnatural. The natural order of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain ground. This was suggested by Thomas Jefferson years ago. And so in free societies, it is imperative and incumbent upon the citizenry to become a watchdog for trepidations and transgressions. And that is why discourses like what we're having today are important. Any society that would give up a little liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither and lose both, said Benjamin Franklin. And liberty without danger is preferable to peace without slavery, said Rousseau. So why is it today, in the United States of America, a country fashioned to be a vanguard of civil liberties, under the presidency of a person whose election in itself is a monumental victory for civil rights, we are at crossroads of worsening the plight of civil liberties? In all fairness, it may be easy to see that the president was himself uncomfortable signing the law. His signing statement in itself exonerates him to a certain extent. A Republican-led Congress can wield enormous pressure, as can the need to pass a bill that includes the defense budget. But I also know that the presidency of the United States is a strong institution, and it can withstand pressure. And I believed in the impeccable credentials of my president, and as a citizen, I must confess, I was monumentally disappointed. Not all citizens can be equally strong, but they can all be equally free. And to be free is to be subject to nothing but the laws, said Voltaire. But what if the very laws of the state stand altered to strengthen government excess and intrusion? I had just believed and hoped that our president would have stood steadfast to protect our liberties. This actions serve to legitimize the right-wing radicalism by making it a policy of bipartisan consensus. The President's pledge not to use the law is heartening, but the potential for use by future administrations is scary. So one thing that we can do this election year is to join hands and strengthen the President's hand in both houses to pave way towards rectification. I draw strength from the fact that even though more than 2/3 of the House voted in favor of the law, there were notable voices of dissent. Some efforts have been undertaken to try and remove the ambiguities. Congressman Garamendi from California has introduced a Due Process Guarantee Act with bipartisan support. Senator Feinstein introduced a companion bill again with bipartisan support. Senator Mark Udall from Colorado has introduced a bill that completely eliminates Section 1021 and 1022. The elected representatives of our nation understand that maintenance of cumulative societal civil liberties is guaranteed only when individual liberties are secured, and violations of such liberties for one group inevitably extend to others slowly but surely. We should engage in grassroots participation in the political process to mobilize such support for such critical pieces of legislation. The economic hardships of the last few years may have dulled the collective focus of our nation, but I am convinced it has not dulled its morality. I have great faith in the system and the will of the nation and its elected representatives to do the right thing. Friends and fellow Americans, the time for assertive, cohesive and peaceful action is now. We can ill afford to be mere bystanders at such crucial instant in time, which will have monumental ramifications for future generations of both American and global children. As a mother and as a human, I feel compelled to make a plea to all the citizens of the United States, the media and our elected representatives to please join hands in concerted effort this election year to work together to restore all civil liberties for all Americans and assertively demand restoration of all fundamental freedoms. God bless America.
All right, that concludes the presentation by our panelists. Governor Johnson, I believe, has another appointment, so he will be leaving us at this point. And we thank him very much for his participation, and best of luck in the elections. At this point, we would like to open the floor to questions. If you have any questions of the panelists, please grab the microphone and ask your question.
Thank you for being here, and we really enjoy your presentation, and especially supporting civil rights, civil liberty of not just our community, but all America. And one of the things I agree with the presenter, I can't remember, sorry, Sava, about that we have to support the president now succeeding in this election. I know Democrats, they don't like what's happening to civil liberty, but because of the Republican leftist that and they threaten, you know, they keep bugging the Democrat and threatening the Democrat that they are un-American. So I do believe that we have also to connect American civil liberty to the world, because as a person going around the world, it's embarrassing to point to other dictator system and say you're dictator while we are setting the trend and setting the example. So I think this is, I don't know what your opinion is, when we take the idea of civil liberty, we have to connect also our standing in the world, that we're setting the example, the trend for other systems. So anytime we eroded that, that means we cannot get it back, and this gives legitimacy to a lot of systems who are oppressive, and we cannot be the leader in that field. So,
It's hard to take the high moral ground if you're not setting a good example. And yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Would either one of you like to comment on this?
Should have said that 20 years ago. The United States has lost that moral leadership to a very large extent. It has nothing left in Latin America. It has only one half friend. They used to have one enemy, Cuba. In Europe, the attachment to the European elites is smoldering. Still something in Eastern Europe, because they still are run by the logic that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But as a new generation is coming up, that's smoldering too. Look around the world, you will find that the moral authority of the US is not only going down to zero, it's negative. What people are saying is, you US, watch yourself. You watch yourself. It's a considerable job. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't have some governments being obedient, because they're afraid of the US. They're afraid of it. They know that the drones may hit somebody, and there may be a couple of SEALs coming. Now, the SEALs are supposed to be operating in 70 countries, according to one of their leaders. And nobody quite knows exactly when they're hitting whom. Now, that's not moral authority. That is the talking of bullets and drones. 20 years ago, your remark would have been very appropriate. Now, I think there are other things that are important. I'm coming to them in 20 minutes, and it'll be much more positive.
Thank you, Dr. Galtung. I am just a hopeless optimist. So I don't feel and I don't think that all is lost, in particular with regard to the plight of the civil liberties issues for Muslims. I think we've just only begun. For years we've been in this country and we have just remained aloof from participation at a grassroots level in the political process. And by initiating this action at this point, I think we have a long way to go. And I have, just this last Eid, we had Congressman Garamendi come, and he spent the whole Eid day with the Muslim community in the Bay Area. He attended the prayer in the morning, then he attended a dinner with us with about 250 people. He stayed there the entire time as a mark of respect, talked about the NDAA at great detail and without fear. So I think if we reach out and if we start the process of inclusion and initiating a political dialogue, we have a long way to go. I believe in the fundamental, as I said in my few words, I believe that the American public has a capability to see right as it is. It may sometimes be too busy to perceive it as such, and it may be prone to be captured by media hype. But it knows right from wrong, and when it is so pointed out, we can build coalitions that will restore the Constitution to its original spirit. And I often quote that, and I think probably at risk of quoting it too often, I believe what President Clinton said, that there's nothing wrong in United States which cannot be cured with what is right with United States.
Nice quote. Yeah, and I should also point out that power never cedes anything except when it's demanded from the citizens. So it's up to us to take the responsibility to demand of our government that they abide by the Constitution and they respect our civil liberties.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said, and I appreciate what you also said in terms of having what's going on with America and the rest of the world. I think a lot of the countries are guilty of that, including England. When they were involved also in attacking Iraq, together. In this case, I would say that this is such a big issue of the civil liberties issue is such a big issue, and it just keeps cropping up. One time or the other, there are resolutions. They creep in, and they start. They just keep coming in, although the majority of the people don't even know about them. So I think that there is a very large force that we have to combat, and we cannot combat individually. I fully agree with you. We got to engage, and we got to be with coalitions. And how do we do that? I think that's where we should spend a lot of our efforts, is how do we do the coalition part.
Yeah, I believe there's a very old quote that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and that's never more true today than it was when our founding fathers made reference to that. Did you have another question? You get the microphone.
I'm taking the opportunity to ask this before the afternoon session brings a lot more people in, because I'm kind of new to this, but I got a flip side question. I'm from a Jewish background. Okay, now because there are so many Muslim activists in Arab countries and in Iran and so forth, preaching destruction of Israel and hatred of Jews, it's been difficult until now to get what should be a natural ally for this movement. But I think more efforts of communication ought to be given. I'd like to know if anybody's tried, because there is a minority. Even at this convention, there's a Jewish movement for the future of Israel being based on compromises with the Palestinians. And that same kind of group is committed to civil liberties. When the black civil rights movement arose, the first allies to jump to support them were Jews, because they had been the victim of this type of discrimination for hundreds of years, and of the worst genocide that had ever occurred. So they felt the pain of a minority. And if we can bridge this gap, I believe you could get some young Jewish allies, and that would make people think. Because part of the American antipathy and the lack of action that you're getting is the feeling that Muslims are hostile to other groups like Jews. And if some Jews were allies, I think it would be help, because there's a strong civil liberties strain, in the Jewish community. But the other thing I want to ask, and this hesitantly, I keep wondering why we don't get a movement to inspire young Muslims, maybe from within the West, that shows an alternative, a complete opposite alternative to the Al-Qaeda way of thinking. Something we have to somehow win inspire and capture the imagination of young Muslim youth that there is another way, that they can compete, they can be good Muslims and they can compete with the West and be friends and trade and not have to destroy and so forth. And I don't see enough, from my point of view, and I apologize being from outside the community, but I'm wondering if there's if more could be done to try to have clerics develop a movement to inspire young people for peace and for tolerance and for, I know that is in the hearts of many of my friends who are Muslims, but I don't see a formal movement that could really show there's another way. And also, if you're an activist and you're poor and you're Muslim and you're alienated in Europe or someplace, it's appealing. Something exciting, show that you can be strong, show that you can stand up to the West. Well, where is the movement that shows you can stand up to the West by competing, by being yourself?
A specific question, please, Ron.
Yeah, the question is there or can there be that type of movement? Could more be done?
Okay, yes, thank you.
Actually, if I could take the liberty of sort of starting off with a response. One of the reasons why I'm involved with American Muslim Alliance is because Dr. Sahi made a phone call to the then chair of the Libertarian Party of California, who, by the way, was Jewish, who asked me, an atheist, to be a liaison to the American Muslim Alliance. So he has been outreaching to various religious communities. The California Civil Rights Alliance, which Dr. Sahi created, also brought in the Archdiocese of San Francisco. So he's reaching out to both Christians, to Jews, to atheists, because we all suffer when civil rights are violated. So I think you're right on, and I think you're absolutely right that we do have some natural allies in the Jewish community. So, either one of you like to?
I can just briefly say one thing. First, a correction. When you said you're not part of the community, that's not right. We're all part of the global community of humanity. So you are very much part of the community. With that correction, definitely I agree with most of your comments, and as Mark just pointed out, the Jewish and the Muslim community and the Christian community, we do work very closely. I myself am part of something that's called United Religions Initiative. I'm on the President's Council there, and it is work based on interfaith thing. And the Jewish community and the Muslim community very recently worked when there was a circumcision ban in San Francisco. We worked very closely in resolving that, and you're absolutely right. Eventually, when somebody tramples one community's rights, or whenever one violation exists in one segment, it automatically goes to the other, and we do have natural grounds to coalesce together and to work together. There's nothing in the faith that, to me, actually, the three faiths have so much more in common that it's actually sad. And regarding the political question of Israel, as you pointed out, personally, I believe in peaceful coexistence of all people together. The hostility between the Muslims and the Jews is probably 60 years old. Before the Balfour Declaration, we existed together, we were persecuted together, we suffered together. So historically, we have common grounds for alliance.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your comment. I just happened to come from Washington, D.C. on my way from Oregon State. And there was the largest Islamic Society of North America's meeting over there, annual meeting. And it was beautiful to see 20 to 25,000 Muslims, attending that convention. And there were so many lectures to just the youth, talking about positive, message, So things are happening, sir. Things are already happening. You may not hear about them. Okay, but things are happening. From where I am in Oregon, we have interfaith groups where Jews, Muslims, and Christians are getting together and talking to each other to promote understanding and promote brotherhood, among each other.
Thank you for your comment, but I think there is something wrong here. You're generalizing a lot. And you're talking about there is nothing happening in there. What about the Arab Spring? The Arab Spring were millions of young people, women and young people and children went in the street, non-violence. Okay? So when you're talking about violent people, you're talking about tiny minority in the Muslim world, which is created by the system and by foreign intervention, which nobody trying to solve the problem. And there is also fanatic, you have it in the two sides. You have the Israelis, who's violent against Palestinian, you have Palestinian who are violent against, and you have that. So, and especially as I said, the Arab Spring is show us all that we all mistaken about how we are perceiving the Arab world and the Muslim world. Because that a movement which is defy everything we believed in the Muslim world and the Arab world. When women taking their families, going into the street and fighting the system with no arms and ready to die, that tells us something that we have to change our perception completely. And I don't agree with anybody, go back to the old perception about the Middle East, because this is still going on, the Arab Spring. And what Syrians they're doing, that is fascinating and fabulous to see the fighting for democracy and freedom and liberty.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Jesse James Hooper. I'm from Detroit. I'm a founding member of Rainbow Coalition. We founded in 1987. When Jesse ran in 84, we just ran as just an organization. And we found in North Carolina. I have a couple of pictures I'll show you after the meeting. We found it here in North Carolina. And on the President's watch, a citizen of Detroit, Iman Lukman, was assassinated by the United States in Detroit. We got Lukman before they got Osama. That's where we are. And I'm trying to keep Biden out of Detroit because he's talking about this bumper sticker killing machine. We don't need that. We need, I'm not for these wars. And I'd like to thank the panel for being here. And there's a lot of things happening in Detroit that, there's no news no more. All we got is CNN, right? There's no news no more. There's a lot of things happening. And I have an experience in 2 days at this convention, and I would think it's kind of like in Israel, I don't know just about the geography, but trying to get around, and I'd have to be leaving town here, the way it's the way try and get into convention with the pass, you know, so we don't go and like maybe bring back memories to somebody, the older people, you know, when blacks had to have passes to go from block to block. I mean, I just want to say that about being involved with Rainbow. And I came as a delegate to the convention. In '92, I came as a Jerry Brown delegate, and I left as a Jerry Brown delegate. Thank you.
All right, so we should wrap this up by closing with some thank you remarks. First of all, of course, thank you to all our panelists for being here. The Reverend Jesse Jackson, Sabahat Rafiq Shomeni, Governor Gary Johnson, and of course, Johan Galtung. And again, we apologize that Ramsey Clark couldn't make it here, but due to a family emergency, he was unable to make it. And again, thanks to the American Muslim Alliance Foundation for sponsoring this and all of the people who participated here. So we very much appreciate all your efforts, and thank you very much, and keep up the fight. Thank you.
If you are interested in watching more civic education videos, please visit our websites.